Hello, my name is Casey Clayton, and I'm a Cloud API and Application Integration Specialist here with Informatica. I'm here to present our CAI Community Process Sample for a composite vehicle service. The goal here is to show you how to create a single web service that can combine in real-time data that's coming from a SQL Server database, from a Salesforce instance, and from a REST API. So as we go through this, let me just kind of present what our scenario is going to be. Now we get, in this case, we've got a car fleet management company. So they want to make it easier for their internal and external users to see in real time all the data that they have about vehicles which they maintain for their customers. And so central to these plans is a new portal project that they're doing. It's going to be available on the web. It's going to be available for use in their customer support call centers and also as an app on the mobile devices of their field service reps. So they want to be able to have the same data available in a number of different avenues. So a key requirement for this portal is a user needs to be able to enter a vehicle identification number, a unique identifier for a vehicle, and then be able to see the complete details of a vehicle that's under management by the company. Now, the vehicle data that the business needs is actually in a bunch of different places. It's in this case, it's on a on-premise SQL Server database, that has some of the information around mileage and what state it's registered in. They have account information about who they are, what their contact phone is, all that is in Salesforce. And then they also have a bunch of, kind of publicly available information that they get from a third-party API provided by the government, from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, also known as the NHTSA. They have, a nice REST-based API that brings in year, make, and model and other type of information that can be used as part of what they're going to display in the UI. So what we want to do here is publish a single web service API endpoint that will accept the VIN as input, connect to all three systems, and then reply with all the data about the vehicle in a single shot. So in the user interface developer doesn't need to know the details of multiple applications and make multiple different calls to different applications, handle all those dependencies. We're going to go ahead and take care of that in the iPaaS. So, so our composite vehicle service, our data sources, we're going to have three different data sources. The first one's going to be a REST API from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. There's a number of different actions they support, including getting data about a vehicle based on the VIN number. There's going to be a SQL Server database that we're going to be working with that contains certain fields that only exist in this back-end legacy application. And then we're going to also be talking to our instance of Salesforce.com, where we keep all of our account and contact and case information. We're going to bring in some information from the account. And so, what's the reason that we're pulling all these different sources together? It's because the business has defined an object. They've said, okay, this is what a vehicle means to us, or this is what a vehicle means to the web portal. And so whenever we make a request for the vehicle, what we want is this set of fields. So it's designed to be application independent. And so they've come up with a list of fields that they want to know whenever somebody's asking about a vehicle. We've got our year, make, and model. There's some mileage and registration state, some account information. But ultimately, these things are going to be coming from different sources, and we're actually going to populate this process object from the data in these three different sources. So the year, make, model, body class are going to come from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. The current mileage and registration state are going to come from the SQL Server. And then we're actually going to use this customer ID that's in the SQL Server to be able to query Salesforce in order to get the account name, phone, and manager. So part of this service is actually going to use data that we didn't even have at the beginning in order to get access to what's within Salesforce. So, what's our end game here? We're looking to create just a simple service that you can call with a very simple payload and return this set of information. This is a common scenario for folks doing mobile apps or web portals where the developer just needs to be able to send the information they have available and get a bunch of information back, and that might be distributed out across multiple systems. So rather than trying to push everything to a single source, make sure that everything's in sync with this other separate data warehouse entity that you're trying to hand code around, you can use this tool to connect to all these different systems in real time. So let's go ahead and hop into the demonstration that we had planned. So this is Informatica Cloud Application Integration, part of our Intelligent Cloud Services iPaaS platform, which has a number of different modules for different use cases. Each kind of a best of breed solution for the types of scenarios that we've seen from our customers over 20 plus years of business. And so the application integration is actually where we're working now. It brings us into an Explorer. And so we're currently in our CAI Community Samples project in a folder called Composite Vehicle Service. And our goal here is to go ahead and build this process out from scratch, but there are some building blocks that we have in place. I want to show just quickly the database connection. So this is our sample DB connection that we have, and all you need to be able to connect to any JDBC capable database, whether it's SQL or Oracle, is have the JDBC connection credentials, a username and a password, and then you can actually go ahead and connect to it. It will bring in the list of all the available tables and give you actually the list of the fields and even a preview of some of the values within the fields. And it's always doing this in real time. So whenever you're working with our tool at design time, you're always aware of the latest fields that you've added to Salesforce or that you've added to a database. So here's our sample DB. It's going to have a table that we're going to be working with. This is actually the database here. We've got this demo vehicle table that we're going to be talking to that has a VIN number and then some other fields we're interested in. So that's one source, is our sample DB. The other is our sample Salesforce connection, and so we authenticate to Salesforce using OAuth. We can also you can also put in like secret key, secret token type information, but our OAuth capability allows you to just authorize this as a system user, and then it doesn't need to store the credentials here within the tool. Having this set up, giving it a name, go ahead and publishing it, you'll still have access to all the objects that exist within Salesforce. And anytime you need to bring in anything new, you just need to republish this connection. So those are the two connections that we had. In addition, we needed to be able to talk to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And so I do a separate video where I build up this service connector from scratch. But just briefly, what it's designed to do is reach out to this vehicle API that is available here at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. They got a number of different actions that are available, and you see here, if we call this particular service using a VIN number, it's going to return a bunch of information. This is the information that we're looking for to include within our process. So we have back within their application integration, we're going to call it at this URL. We're going to do a get vehicle by VIN. We're going to pass it the service VIN that's coming from our process or our user interface. We can go ahead and test out what that's going to look like, and you can see that we're actually pulling certain values out of here's the same payload that we saw in the browser. We're actually just taking this information and consuming it, and then creating fields that we can use within the context of our process. So you'll be able to see us use the year, make, and model that we're pulling out of that larger payload, and also have access to other values. So this was the service connector that we have set up. It's just calling the URL. You can see it's constructing it based on the instructions provided. We didn't have to import anything. It just made it real easy to get to this free government API. So with that service connector, we then define a connection. The connection allows you to keep track of credentials between Sandbox and production, or if you have multiple instances of the same type of system with the same backend API, but they're just different data sources, different locations. This allows you to control that. These app connections are actually the building blocks that we're going to use to create our process. Okay, and just before we hit the new button to get started, I did want to show you our process object. This is that business definition of everything that makes up a vehicle. So they have their VIN, year, make, and model in here, the values that are to be coming from the ERP, as well as the things that are coming from Salesforce. But the whole point is you don't have to know what system the data is coming from in order to know that these are the properties of a vehicle. And that really is going to make it easier to reuse this when you're creating different processes that return vehicle information. You'll just need to state that we're going to turn a vehicle rather than remember all these different fields. So we'll see that within our process. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to hit the new button. This is where you create the different types of assets that make up cloud application integration. We talked a little bit about the process object and the service connector, as well as our app connections. These are the building blocks to create these processes that we're going to work with today. So I'm going to hit create. and it's going to bring us in to our blank canvas. And so I'm going to try to quickly just set up all the properties of this process, but we are going to build it from scratch, and we're even going to incorporate different types of fault handling techniques so you can really see how these sorts of things come together in actual real world scenarios. So within our process properties, there's going to be several different sections that we're going to want to fill out, so we can just go ahead and maximize this space. The first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to give it a name, and so the name we're going to give it is going to be this get composite vehicle information, relatively descriptive. You'll see within our API management there's ways to have different versions of the same process with different inputs and outputs, but that'll be the topic of another video. And then we're just going to go ahead and put a friendly description in here that I already have prepared. This is our CAI community web service to pull data from National Highway Traffic Safety Administration API, SQL, and Salesforce. So the next step is to tell application integration what's going to trigger this process. And generally speaking, that means we're going to create a web service, and it's going to have a REST and a SOAP-based endpoint. So we'll create both. You don't have to decide in advance what type of service you're creating. But we're going to create that endpoint, and then a request to that endpoint is going to be the start event for our process. And generally, the result will be getting a response back. But we do have the ability to trigger the same response, on the same data set that might be coming from a number of different sources. So, if you have a queuing system like ActiveMQ or Amazon SQS or AMQP, JMS, we can listen to those sorts of events. Amazon S3, we can listen to Kafka, or look in file locations or FTP locations and trigger processes based on all these different things. But the most common that we're going to be working with here is creating a web service. So these allowed groups and allowed users, these are things that actually would be defined within the administrator. This is where you set up the users and user groups for access. And so you need to give us a user or a group, or explicitly say that we're going to allow anonymous access, which is what we're going to do here. Otherwise, you won't get an endpoint for this service. So it's either going to be a public service, or you need to provide users that have access to it. This allows us to decide whether we want to run on our cloud-hosted infrastructure, which actually is a fully elastic space, so that whether it's one request or 10,000 requests, we spin up the necessary infrastructure to make sure that we handle all those requests without sending them a timeout. So this is the most common, gives you the ability to expose your information to partners and cloud apps without having to put any holes in the firewall. But you do have the ability to publish your process to a secure agent if you want to have an internal-only service for security reasons. The financial institutions and such have occasion to do that. So we said that this is going to be a web service. We said it's going to be a public service. We'll go ahead and define our input field in this case, because it's just the one. We're going to just send in to this service a value called VIN or INVIN, or vehicle identification number. We'll just call it INVIN. And this is going to be the identifier for the vehicle we're going to look up. As you recall, we've got this VIN number in Salesforce. That's also how that web service that's provided by National Highway Traffic Safety Administration works. So the input's going to be our INVIN, and then the output is going to be, and we're going to return all this information about a vehicle. So we might want to first include maybe a message. If the vehicle wasn't found, we want to be able to return a message like that, because our service worked, but maybe there was no data in the database. And then really what we're after here is returning this vehicle. So we're going to say out vehicle, and then rather than just being a simple kind of text or number-based type, the types that we support here in Cloud Application Integration will include the process objects, which we call custom types, and then also types that are come from the connections that you've made, which we'll see here in a bit. But really what we're focused on right now is the kind of output that we want from this process. And so we'll come in and say the output is going to be, in our CAI community samples, the type is this PO vehicle that we defined and lives in the Composite Vehicle Service folder. So we'll select this type. And then this is going to give us the ability out over the course of the process to populate all the different fields that make up vehicle, as we get the data from the various sources. So back to our process. That's going to be enough for us to get started. I will turn the tracing level up to verbose so we can kind of see what goes on in the console. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and hit save. There is one other piece that I did want to incorporate, like I said, a little some additional fault handling logic. So, what's going to happen? One of the first things, even before we get through this, is what's going to happen if National Highway Traffic Safety Administration service is down, or how can we replay these messages, or what can we do? What the business would like is for you to try a couple of times, and if it's still down, then let's go ahead and just return an error message. And so we're going to include just a temporary field here to indicate a retry counter. This is a very simple kind of error handling logic. A lot of our customers will have little subroutines that they use over and over again to put things in Splunk or write to a database error log. But we're just going to include something that will let us count, have it try 3 times, and then stop. So here's going to be our retry counter. It's going to go ahead and start at 1. So these little bits and pieces are in place, but really we want to talk about what the service is going to do. So we're going to drag, as a very first step within our process, a service call. And so, just by dragging the elements from this palette, like assignment steps, sub-process invocation, create records in Salesforce, or a database, there's a number of different types of steps that we'll be talking about. But the one we're going to do first is let's just invoke a REST or a SOAP-based service that we have a service connector for. So we'll come in here and we'll say the service type is going to be coming from a connection. The connection is coming from our CAI Community Samples Composite Vehicle Service. It's that production instance of this API. So we're going to go ahead and select that. And then if the API has a number of different actions you can do, you'll see them all here. Right now we just have the get vehicle by VIN action, so we can go ahead and select that. And then it's going to tell us here, kind of in the definition, what it expects, and then what it's going to give us back. And then we'll be able to use any of these values returned from the service anywhere later within the process. So let's go ahead and set up what the service VIN, what the input's going to be here. I'll come in and I'll say the field that we're going to send to service VIN so that we can trigger this web service is literally just going to be the value that we sent into our process, our InVIN. So that's the only thing that we have to assign from the input. And then we can go ahead and decide, from here. Now there's going to be 2 kinds of potential, there's three possible responses, right? Successful, we get our VIN number back. Another one is the service is up, but it couldn't find the VIN. And then the third scenario is, well, what happens if the service is down? And so our process logic will let you handle all those different scenarios. So if we wanted to have an unhappy path, where what do we do if this service goes down? It's not that we don't, maybe the data's there, maybe it's not. We want to make sure this enrichment step happens. So we want to include some business logic for what happens when the service goes down. We say we catch faults, and it's going to create a fork in the road for what happens when the service is down. And so we're just going to do something really simple in this case. What we'd like to do is check our retry count. We had that retry count field, and so all we need to do is we just need to put a little decision here that says check retry count. Let's say it's less than 4. We can come in here and say, okay, remember that retry counter? Well, if it is, we need to make sure that the system knows that actually it's a number. So, it's everything's strongly typed, it's smart, everything's conditional based on the type. So now that it's an integer, we can see that we can set that, well, if it's, whatever. We'll say less than or equal to 3, or less than 4. So here's our condition. Okay, so what is this going to mean to us? Well, if the retry count is less than 4, we want it to try again, but maybe just wait a moment. So it's super easy to do things that you can describe in that fashion just by adding a wait step here. So rather than having a replay queue or a bunch of places where you need to store messages that haven't gone through, the process itself will maintain its state and wait for a period of time. We don't have all day, so let's say that each wait is only going to be 10 seconds. And then after it waits 10 seconds, then we're just going to say that we've tried. So we're going to go ahead and increment our retry here. So retry counter coming from using a formula, and we can just use our little expression editor to say, okay, well, our retry counter plus 1. Easy enough. And then we're going to go ahead and try it again. So we've incremented the retry counter, and then we'll just go back and say jump back and give it another shot at get vehicle by VIN. So remember, we're constructing an unhappy path here. What happens if this service goes down? But I just want to show how simple it is to bake it right into the process rather than have to worry about an external exception handling queue. So this is going to be, wait 10 seconds. And then it's going to go ahead and increment that and go back. Now, if it goes through those, multiple retries and we still can't get through, well, then we're going to just have to apologize to whoever's calling the service. We're going to use an assignment step to assign our out message here and just say, error NHTSA not available. Now, this is not necessarily the end of the road. I mean, maybe we still want to go get that other information. We just won't have the year, make, and the model. So we're just going to include that error message as part of this path. But we're actually going to go ahead and let the process proceed as if everything was A-OK. So here on the far side of getting the vehicle by VIN, what we'd like to do, if we found something, is begin to populate some of the outputs. And so the assignment step, lets us put a value from one place into another, as simple as that. And so what we'd like to do is remember our out vehicle that we defined. Actually, it's this object. It's got a number of different properties, and this is how we don't have to worry about remembering everything that makes up a vehicle to the business. It's here presented for us as part of this object. So I'm going to come in and say we're going to populate year. We're going to go ahead and populate make. We're going to go to model. And then we're also going to include this body class. So these values, where are they going to come from? So each one of these is available from, as far as we can tell, from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration service call that we made. Maybe not all of them, but we'll take a look and we'll say, all right, well, the year is easy enough. We're going to go ahead and map that from the year. The make, we're going to get that information from the field make. All this is stuff that's coming from that web service call that we're just mapping straight to the output that we're going to send to the people who call our web service. I go ahead and drop the model. And now this body class, well, when we were doing the service connector, we didn't actually go out of our way to make it nice and easy output field, for a designer to use. But we did remember to say, well, hey, let's return the retire response. So just in case somebody's an expert in what all the fields might possibly mean, they can go in and grab anything. We pass the entire response right through to this service. So we're grabbing this piece of the service response and using it in our output of our process. So, we're going to call this step populate out vehicle with NHTSA data. Okay, so at this point, believe it or not, we actually do have a process built. So I just want to show briefly, we've got our validation is, we didn't tell this jump step to go back to get vehicle by VIN. So we do have built-in validation to all the processes that'll catch you when you forget to do something. This one's just going to go back to get vehicle by VIN. That's happy. You can see that the jump is occurring there. That's our retry logic. So here is this get vehicle by VIN, populate it with the data. There is an option that even if the service was successful, maybe we do need to check to see if any data was returned. And so, I promised we'd call our service, but let's just go ahead and make sure that this is as realistic as possible by putting a little data decision on the path where the service returned, but maybe the data actually wasn't populated. Maybe there was an error message. We could check that message field. Or maybe we can just say, hey, if the year that we get back is blank, then we're not going to populate that data. We're just going to go ahead and skip that step. We could also include into our error message, like we'll just go ahead and copy this step. Copy this step up to here. And just say assignment not found in National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to error. So, these are, all of our various paths. The service is down. We couldn't find anything. All of this is actually being handled within the context of a single process, and we're all doing it visually without any special code. So now that we have, all of our I's dotted and T's crossed, we can come in here and we can say save. And then what we'd like to do is go ahead and publish this service. So publishing is what's going to generate the initial endpoint. Now there's a number of different places we could go from here. There's a way to run this process from inside of this tool here. We could go to our API manager and actually have a full Swagger IO based interface for interacting with it that the web developers might be able to use. But I'm just going to kind of keep this simple, and we're going to go ahead and use Postman just to show that we really already have created a service. So here's the URLs that we've generated, the one for the REST endpoint. This one's the SOAP endpoint. You can see we can get the Swagger, the WSDL. I'm just going to grab this. I'm going to go ahead and hop over to my Postman, and then I'm just going to put this URL that we have right here in this box, the Get Composite Vehicle Information Service. You can see that we're just going to be sending in this payload, I'm going to call it invin. This is the value that we want to send in. So let's go ahead and send. Excellent. So boom, we've got our out year, make, model, and body class. All that's retrieved from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. So at this point, we actually have created a service. In API management, we could call this V1.0, and what we're about to do next, V2.0. But we're just going to build on this process to complete our desired goal of making sure that we can hit all three services. So, this looks like a fair amount, but really when you think about it, the complexity that we're handling within this process, just to make sure that we're getting a value back from the service, what the business wants us to do if the service is down, what it wants us to do if it's up, what it wants us to do if we can't find that value, all can be mapped here visually without worrying about things getting lost in translation when this goes to Agile development. So the next step in our process after we've made it through this gauntlet is we want to be able to reach out to the database. This database, remember, has a VIN number in it. It's got a mileage and a registration state, but it also has this customer ID that we need to get at Salesforce. So how do we get at these sorts of kind of relational sources? Salesforce and databases, we work at them in exactly the same way within this particular tool. We think about each table as an object. And so if we can declare a field that represents a row within that object, it allows us to get the information from Salesforce or a database, and then when we update it using one of these assignment steps, it actually pushes those changes back to the originating system without you having to take any additional steps. So, it makes it kind of a real, design the way the business would describe it type of interface. So we're going to add to our process two temporary fields that are going to be used. One's going to go to get to our database. So I'm just going to give this the easy enough name of DB demo vehicle. And then, so this is where the type becomes especially important because, this is definitely not just an integer or a text. And it's not just something that we've kind of defined, somewhat arbitrarily like a process object. It's actually going to be coming from the schema of a connection. And so we do give that type availability here by saying that this is going to be a connection defined type. I can come in and say, all right, I want the connection is going to be my database connection that's in this folder called sample DB. And so sample DB is aware of all the various tables that, of course, that we have in our database, but the one we're interested in is demo vehicle. So we'll select that. And now we have this kind of instance of a record in DB demo vehicle. We're going to do the same thing for Salesforce. And I'm going to say this is going to be another connection defined type. This one's going to be coming from our community connections, but the sample Salesforce. This is why it's nice to kind of have a folder for shared connections because you're going to use them for a lot of different processes. That's what we've done in this case. Is the shared database and Salesforce connections are in the same spot. Now you can see we have a list of all of the Salesforce objects, including custom objects. And then when we select one, it's going to give us access to read and write any of the fields and custom fields within that object. So I'm going to hit OK here. So we've got our demo vehicle and our Salesforce account, these two temporary fields. And now let's see how we can go ahead and use them within our process. So after we've gotten this information, we want to go to the database. And so we actually get access to the database by using an assignment step. And so just like mapping a field value or a name, in this case we're going to literally take a query and then we're going to use it to populate our record. So I'm going to say query demo vehicle by VIN. And here in the assignment, I'm going to say, all right, here's my DB demo vehicle. It's assigned using a query. And then I know I'm headed the right direction when I go add condition. And here's a list of all the fields within my database. So it's going to help me build the query for that database. I want VIN equals that InVIN value that we've been working with. So this is actually going to go ahead and build up what behind the scenes what the query is going to be. It's going to be very simple. The VIN's unique, so we're only going to expect one row back, and so this is going to be our query there. So now in the next step, what's going to be important is whether or not we got any data back. So we ask the business, okay, well, what happens if we don't get data back? We apply a data decision to this process. So this data decision, in addition to seeing if something's blank, we can actually see if a particular record was returned from a query. So if DB demo vehicle is set, then we got a value. If it's not set, then we didn't actually find anything in our database, and so we got ourselves another unhappy path on our hands. We can come in here and say, out message in this case is going to be error not found in DB. And I could actually include the VIN number in our message to be helpful. And so this is just how you can quickly assign something to out message. And then what I want this process to do, because there's no way to query Salesforce without a customer ID, is I'm going to have this branch completely end, and this is going to go ahead and return, maybe the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration data to the caller if that exists, but then nothing else. So besides this error message. So if we did find data, now we can actually begin to add some additional information to our output. So in this space, we're going to call this one populate out vehicle with DB data. And so here we're going to do another very simple mapping. The values that we set already are fine. We don't actually need to go ahead and reinitialize those or anything. We can just actually begin to fill in what we know from this step. So we can say, okay, our out vehicle values that we wanted from here were registration state. We wanted a current mileage, and then the customer ID is also found here within the database. And so these are the three fields that we wanted to get access from the database. So I can go ahead and say that this is being assigned using a field. And the cool part about this is, because we think of all these things like objects, all we have to do is go find DB demo vehicle, open up DB demo vehicle, and then select the actual DB field that we want to use for our output. So I'm going to say this is coming from DB demo vehicle, the mileage field. They don't have to have exactly the same name or anything. We're taking the values from the database and putting them in our process object for output. Same thing, we'll just grab this customer ID. And so those are the values that we have, that we're going to use in our output from the database. But let's go ahead and push through and finish off what we started, and say that before we're going to end this process, what we'd like to do is make that call to Salesforce to get the additional Salesforce data. So after we've populated out vehicle with DB data, we can come in here, add a new assignment step, say that we're going to go after our Salesforce account. Just like we did the database, we can use a query. And just like we did a database, we'll build the query using the fields that we know that already exist in the Salesforce object. So here, what I'm going to be going after, I think it's a field called ERP ID. What good Salesforce instance doesn't have two fields called ERP ID, but this is the one that I want. I'll be able to tell that for sure. But what I want to map it from is actually the value that we didn't have to start with, the value that only exists in the database. And so this query is going to be driven by DB demo vehicle customer ID. So if the ERP ID custom field in Salesforce equals this value, and then just to show that what we're talking about is we've got an account record here, just for a home and catering group, and they've got this value 453 in their ERP ID. Now, what we want to get from this record is the phone number, and then actually some information about the account owner or even their manager. So we're going to go up to the user record, maybe 1 or 2 levels. So here's our query to get our Salesforce account. It's correlated, back with our database data. If we think that there's a risk for a disconnect there, we could do another data decision to see if we found anything. But really, all I want to do is use this data. And then so I'm going to just call this step query SFDC account by ERP ID, just to make it clear when everybody's kind of following along. And then here in this next step, what I want to do is just begin to populate the output fields. And so populate output or out vehicle from Salesforce account or Salesforce data in general, because it's not always going to be on the account. Actually, we have the ability to reach up into related records, as we'll show you. So last few things that we're going to assign are going to be coming from, we're going to go to out vehicle. We're going to grab this account name. We're going to go out vehicle, and we're going to grab account phone, and then this account manager field. All right, so account name, just like we did from the database, we're going to say this is coming from a field. We're going to go find our Salesforce account, and then we're going to select from the entire list, the account name. In this case, we're going to select from our Salesforce account the account phone. And then here, this account manager, now this was an interesting one because, Salesforce only has the ID of the user that owns it on the record. And so, maybe they wanted the name for that, so we have to go up to the user record. But the actual requirement here is they want the manager of that guy. So within our designer, we can actually say, all right, well, we need the Salesforce account, but actually we need the owner. So we're going to go with the owner ID. And so now we see all the fields that are, on a user record, because that's what's, the owner is. But what we need really is the owner's manager. And then so it's the owner's manager's full name that we want to be able to return at this time. And so without creating a bunch of formula fields, we're able to work our way through the various Salesforce objects that are related to get the details that we need in order to populate our values. So we've populated the out values from Salesforce. We're going to go ahead and hit save on our get composite vehicle information. Now all we need to do to make it available for us to call is to go ahead and publish it. All right, once we've published it, all we need to do is go and invoke it. So I'm just going to go back to Postman here. We're going to go ahead and use that same invin that we had before, but hopefully we'll get some more data back from our systems. And so we'll hit send. All right, so there's our entire out vehicle. We got the year, make, and model. And the body class, we got that mileage and registration state and customer ID, and then we have those 3 fields that came from Salesforce. And just to make sure that this is working the way that we want, let's say that this value was slightly different, right? So we can send in this. Okay, well, error not found in DB. That's it's not like it works for any number. It's only bringing in the information that potentially we get from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, but none of the other details, just because we don't have it. So this is, one example of the error handling. If we go back, we can make sure that we get the information from each. And then to close out, our demonstration, I just want to show inside our application integration console, you can actually take a look at the various executions of the process that you've made. So here's the 3 times we've run the get composite vehicle information service. We've run it a few times before, but let's go ahead and take a look at the details of this particular execution. You can see here, came in the front door with that input value. We invoked the get vehicle by VIN service, with this value, and we got back all this stuff from that service. And then based on that, we made a decision. We saw that we had a value in the year, so we populated the data there. We queried our database. We had a value there, so we populated it. We queried Salesforce, and then we left. So that was obviously a happy path type flow for us there. If we were to come in and take a look at this execution, and you can always go to view previous runs from here, but we got the vehicle by VIN, we got these values back, but our DB query sent us down this unhappy path. So you can see the process executions in each step along the way within the process console. So I hope that this has been valuable. We were able to take pretty simple input and return composite output. We're able to bring in this data from multiple sources, and I feel that this was a good example of the kind of things that our customers are doing every day when they're interacting with cloud application integration. So, all right, thanks again. I appreciate your time.